Hi, good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me and see me okay, and welcome to today's conference. Today's conference is, of course, focusing on the development and the implementation of NHS Imaging networks. I hope you're all okay. If you've been to a conference of ours before, you will know how to use the questions tab. If not, I will talk you through that now. The questions box will be your conduit through to myself and all the speakers on today's conference and webinar. So please familiarise yourself with the questions box. Have a little look in front of you now. We've got a slide open which tells you how to do that. Please expand that questions box. Click the recorded button at the top. So the last ask is at the top. And then if you can just all write good morning in there for me, that'll be great. So let me know you can use it okay. Let me know where you're joining from, regional area maybe, and we'll just run a quick register on that. So just to clarify, everybody, that is the questions tab. Please expand that, open it up, and say good morning. That'll be great. Today's conference, as mentioned, is going to be focused on the implementation of the imaging network. It's been a very, very last minute conference. We know there is a funding round cut off on the 31st of this month. So we thought it imperative to hold the conference now, give you all some further guidance and tips and tricks from the curators, from some of the curators of the implementation guide. Today's conference wouldn't be possible without an organisation called Axon Radiology getting involved. You will hear from them on today's conference. They are on the ground service providers, literally working tirelessly to try and help NHS imaging specialists and departments utilise and harness the implementation guide and obviously deliver it. More importantly, run through a quick morning register. Take us back to school. Morning, Ali, Will, Jessica, Nick, Andrew, Pradip, Oliver, Stephanie, Paul, Jessica, Amy, yes, Nicola, John, thank you all. That's absolutely brilliant. Just to let you know, for today's conference, we're not going to have a comfort break. It's very short and punchy. We've got representation from NHS E&I, the RCR, a health board in Scotland, and the RCN. So it's going to be content packed. So yeah, please choose your time wisely to get those teas and coffees replenished. And we'll get going. So the first presentation today is from Moira Crotty. Moira is the IT lead for National Imaging Transformation Programmes at NHS E&I. I'm going to start with some of the more technical issues while implementing the implementation guide. So Moira, can you hear me okay? And if so, I will, yeah, I'll see you in a second. Thank you, everybody, for getting the messages in. It's absolutely brilliant.
Hi, Sean.
Hi, Moira, you okay?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very well. The sun is shining in Manchester, which is a very rare occasion, so I daren't complain.
Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen.
Okay.
Hopefully this will work.
Yeah, we've got it as a backup regardless, so we've got everything covered.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie Joe. Thank you, John. Thank you, Luke.
I don't know what are you seeing a slide deck at the moment or not?
Sorry, no, we're just seeing the GoToWebinar invitation at the moment.
Okay.
Need to switch that
Let
over.
me just try and see if I can solve that.
Oh. Thank you, Imtaz. Thank you, Ajith. Thank you very much for joining. Absolutely brilliant. Just a quick one while we get stuck on the slides. Please make sure you're utilising today's conference by getting involved in the chat. Please ask as much questions as you can. As mentioned, we've been working really hard over the last 2 weeks to get this conference set up to solely benefit you all as imaging specialists. So please get involved in the chat today. We're nearly there, Moira. We have got the slides up. On the bottom row, there's a little tiny box, looks like a TV screen, just underneath where your mouse is now. That's the one. Click that, just the one to the right.
Yeah,
that's short.
Unfortunately, I have a multi-monitor setup, and that seems to confuse it if I do that. So I think we may have to work like this. Apologies.
Okay, one last little go, because it's on the display settings as well. You've got another screen saying display settings. You should have.
Okay.
It's a separate screen completely. Have you got it up on? Can you see that?
Hi Moira, if you just go into full screen for me again, and then you'll see display settings. Perfect. So in the middle one there, display settings, and what that'll do, that'll swap it over for us.
Okay, lovely. So that one, swap that one.
Yes,
lovely.
Absolutely perfect.
Okay,
Moira.
great stuff.
We've got it. We've got it. Right. Anyway, I will see you in 20, Moira, for some questions, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm part of the NHS England and Improvement National Imaging team. So I've been working with RIS and PACS systems for quite a long time. I started my career as a radiographer, but I'm now working with the National Imaging team, looking at some of the IT aspects of forming up imaging networks. So that's what I'm going to look at today. No, I don't seem to have a page down. Let's try that. Okay, so what I'm going to speak about today is a bit of the background, a bit about how you might approach sorting out the IT for a network. So for the vast majority of people, I know that imaging IT is a relatively mature diagnostic modality compared to some of the others, but nonetheless, forming up into a network presents an additional challenge for many people. So the main element of the presentation is about how you might want to approach looking at those challenges and where to go. And then just to finish off at the end, as Sean has already mentioned, NHS England and Improvement are in the process of accepting proposals for some funding that we received in the government spending round, which is designed to improve imaging IT. So I'll speak a little bit about that just towards the end there. So the NHS is establishing imaging networks. So what is a network? Generally, it's defined by geography. So a group of trusts in a geographical area, in a region, get together to start to share services and potentially to share workforce, potentially to share governance and decision-making mechanisms. There are a number of dimensions to being a network, but they're defined very clearly by geography and patient flow. Some of them are quite small. So I think the smallest one we have has 2 trusts in it, and the largest one has 14. So there is a degree of variability in here, but the fundamental thing is geography. And why are we doing this? So the policy background to this, there has been a lot of talk in the last 15, 20 years about investments in diagnostics and problems with diagnostics. So we're aware that the system is absolutely under strain. So as part of that response, in both the NHS long-term plan, in the Transforming Imaging Services Target Operating Model, both from 2019, and then in the Richards Review of 2020, we started to see a focus, if you like, on imaging IT. So specific mentions in the NHS long-term plan about diagnostic imaging networks, and a lot of an increasing amount of attention to the absolute importance of IT in supporting those networks and supporting imaging services as we move forward. So looking at a bit more detail, what might that mean? What might IT do for an imaging network? It will certainly, hopefully, provide interoperability, and we'd like to see that based on standards, mandated standards, open standards. It does feel like it's the way forward if we're going to be able to share data seamlessly and quickly and slickly, then standards have to be the way to go. There's universal availability of diagnostic results in patient care records. One would have liked to think that that was happening already, but it isn't. So there is some scope for us to improve that, to improve how we move diagnostic results back to the record where the patient is being treated, where they're being moved on, when they're receiving treatment for their condition or even just the diagnosis of their condition. We want to look at an environment in which AI can be deployed. There is a massive opportunity here and a great deal of attention being paid by both the research and supplier communities to using AI, particularly around image interpretation. Now, there is perhaps a little way to go before we see it in general widespread use, but there are certainly very interesting projects being run and pockets of excellence which we'd like to see a little bit wider, more widely distributed. We need to start collecting data for R&D. So there again, we are, as an imaging community, we're relatively well served by national imaging data sets, things like the diagnostic imaging data set. But wouldn't it be great if we could combine it with other data? So DICOM data is very well standardized, but RIS data perhaps not so much. So can we move to standardize that data and start to use that more systematically to support research? We could look at shared e-rostering. Now, e-rostering is a system whereby staff can be deployed into the environments which are where it is necessary for them to be, but done in a mechanism that doesn't use paper. So there is enormous advantage for staff in being able to access their roster on their phones and change a shift, swap a shift, find out where their shifts are. So we'd like to see a lot of movement on that one. We'd like to see cross-organisational scheduling. So I personally live about halfway between Leeds and Bradford. It would be really useful to me if I could schedule in my X-ray appointment into Leeds or Bradford and I could choose. Now, I can't do that yet, but I'm hopeful that in the future I will be able to. We'd like to see standardisation of operational processes, how you manage DNAs, for example. Do we text patients? Do we email them? Do we phone them? How do we manage them? How do we define them as DNA? Shared data and analytics is another massive opportunity that we can start to manage a network as a network if we can see what's going on all of the CT scanners all the way across the network. We have much better opportunities there for understanding capacity and demand, for understanding if we can start to potentially move workload about. We want to look at future proofing. So we do understand that networks clearly serve a geography, but some people live near the edge of a geography and might want to cross the boundary. So coming to think about a future solution where images can move around inside the network, but also across those network boundaries a little bit more slickly than they do at the moment. We know that they can be moved at the moment, but the process is slightly clunky and a bit slow. So we need to try and improve that. Specifically in terms of what NHS England and Improvement are looking for, there's two very specific metrics on the bottom there. We're looking for networks to be able to do what we term a global patient search. You could also regard it as creating a single patient history, so that I can sit in my hospital in Bradford and know what other x-rays have been done in other hospitals in the network. And once I can see them, I can get them, okay? The other thing we're very interested in is shared reporting workflow. So the reporting staff, both radiologists and reporting radiographers, are under extreme pressure at the moment. We know that there is a massive demand for their services. What we'd like to look at is whether forming up into networks allows people to balance that workload a little bit better and provide a little more resilience to the system, as well as potentially opening up opportunities for specialist support. So if a trust in your network has a particular expertise in, I don't know, paediatric neuroradiology, for example, then it would be useful for the other trusts in the network to be able to access that. So those are the two on the bottom are the ones that we're most focused on, but that doesn't mean that the others aren't of interest. They absolutely are, and they are all things that modern IT can potentially do for your network. However, not all networks are created equal. Some networks we know already fairly well established and quite mature and doing some of this stuff already, which is absolutely fantastic. That's great, and I applaud them all. However, others are less mature. And they're less mature for a variety of reasons. They may have different numbers of organisations, their local populations may vary. Imaging may not be a priority in their part of the world. So we're seeing all sorts of variability in terms of the IT and the structures which will eventually form up around networks. And that's fine, that's not a problem, we're quite happy with that. But if we're going to help to guide or to advise people about what to do, it's very difficult to write a prescription one size fits all because it doesn't. So what we've decided to do is take more of a toolkit approach. So we've developed some tools which will help people establish where they are, number one, so that what is your baseline, where are you coming from? Then to look at what you need, So what is it you want to get to? And then some guidance for how you actually get there, and what are the pitfalls you are likely to experience on your way. So we've spoken to people who have made this journey already, and they've provided us with lots of materials, lots of case studies and examples, which are all incredibly useful and are available on the web link at the bottom of the slide. There is the NHS Futures Collaboration Platform National Imaging Transformation Programme section, which is a bit of a mouthful, but there is a lot of material there which can help people in making this journey, if you will. So I'm going to just briefly talk about some of the elements we've got on that website. You're welcome to look in more detail, obviously, but just briefly to say this is how we're envisaging people using it. So it sounds silly, but do you know all the organisations which are providing imaging services within your network? Do you know the names of all the trusts? Are there community health providers in your network? Are there other providers? The element which has recently emerged and will need to be accommodated in some way is the community diagnostic hubs. So start from knowing where you are. Do you know if your organisation is making use of outsourcing for reporting? This is really very common, and it is a technical element. There is a technical element to it. There's also a workflow element. It's well worth understanding that. Also, what are your clinical priorities in the system? So are you part of the stroke network? Is there a local cancer alliance, which also have views on how they want images to flow, where their patient pathways are operating? So just a bit of research and background is always useful. And then that's a little bit further into the world of IT. What IT have you got? So do you all have HSCN connections? I'm hoping that the majority of you do. Well, I know the majority of you do. I'm hoping that everybody does. But there's something in checking that. Which organisations are providing key IT services to your trusts? So, for example, does one of your trusts have an outsourced IT support arrangement? If so, just worth understanding and realising, because they will have to be involved in those discussions as you go forward. What IT systems do you currently have? Now, clearly in an imaging world, the radiology information system and the PACS, the picture archiving system, are key, but there are other elements. There are other elements which are currently providing services to support imaging, but also could support more services in relation to imaging. So some questions, some things to think about. There aren't right and wrong answers, but they're questions which possibly need to be answered. Another way of thinking about that is to do it visually. So I'm a visual thinker, so I like diagrams. So you could create a version of a diagram that, for all the trusts, said which PACS systems do you have, and are they already shared? So some PACS systems we know are already shared across trust boundaries. Similarly for RIS, there are areas where shared RISs are in place. This is a good foundation. Do you use voice or dictation for reporting? In some places very common, in other places not so common. I'm assuming, again, everybody uses the image exchange portal, but again, it's worth checking. What EPR and PAS arrangements do you have? Again, are they shared across some of your existing organisations? This, as you might imagine, is an entirely fictitious group of trusts. I don't know if anybody got all of this, but it's just a way of thinking about it. So if you are the kind of person who tends to think in diagrams, then I would suggest doing it visually like this is equally as good a way as answering questions. So, okay, we've established our baseline. Next, what do we want the solution to look like? What do we want the IT to give us in terms of the network? So what are the clinical and operational priorities? What are the use cases? Do you have a need for sharing specialist reporting? Do you have a need for multidisciplinary teams which operate across organisations? Which data items do you want to share and with whom? Now, I'm sure a lot of this is already known to you. It's other things are just perhaps worth thinking about, things that perhaps get forgotten. So do you want to share data with your patients? And if you want to share data with your patients, what do you want to share? Do you want to share reports or images as well, or scheduling information? So there are groups of trusts we're aware who are looking at trying to provide access for patients to do their own scheduling appointments and for them to modify their own appointments. So that is something I'm sure we will see more of in the future. In terms of aggregated data or de-identified data, do you want to use it for research purposes? Do you want to train and validate artificial intelligence algorithms locally? Would you like to support the National AI Lab in their work on validating AI algorithms? Do you want data for operational management? And if so, how do you want to do it? Do you want to look across all your trusts or just across one or two of them? Do you want your national data collections to be put in as a network potentially, or put in by the network? Do you have access to that data? Do you understand what your fellow trusts are doing and where their pinch points are? So there are a number of possible ways. At a technological level, there are a number of possible solutions here, or approaches to a solution. And it might be that for you, you need more than one component to these to get to your overall solution. So there is the so-called rip and replace model, whereby all PACS and RIS across your network is pulled out and replaced with a single instance solution or a shared instance solution. Now that has an awful lot of benefits, undoubtedly, but it's a very big project to take on, and it might not fit with your existing contractual arrangements or the wishes of your organisation. Similarly, a vendor neutral archive can provide a lot of sharing functionality. Perhaps not all, so it's not going to support shared reporting workflow, for example, but it may well support a global patient search. So there's value there. A RIS or a PACS, an interoperability platform, or what sometimes is called a network reporting platform. These come in a variety of flavors. Is that the right word? Suppliers in the marketplace now have these solutions, and each supplier's solution does achieves their end in a slightly different way, but nonetheless they are out there, they are available, and they can be used. Whether you choose to base your solution in the cloud or not, clearly there is a significant move towards cloud first provision, but there is still a lot of on-premises systems and solutions, and for those whose network links are perhaps not everything that they should be, that's a consideration. That is absolutely a consideration. Do you want data extract and visualization tools? You almost certainly do, but they're fairly generic, or they can be very specific. So again, the suppliers, the PACS suppliers are starting to develop these tools and have these available. Equally, there are local groups who are taking a slightly different approach and more of a tailored local hand-built approach. Extracting DICOM data is relatively simple. It's well standardized, so it's relatively simple to get hold of. RIS data, as I said earlier, it's a little bit less standardized, so potentially not less useful, but more difficult to handle. And the way that you choose what you need for your solution depends on what your clinical and operational priorities are, how much funding you've got, where you want to be in 5 years' time. We're not being in any way prescriptive about how people go about this, as long as in the end they get to a point of saying we can do a global patient search and we can share reporting workflow. So those are the metrics, the things that we will be looking out for in terms of what we'd like people to achieve. Okay, so you've had a look at your baseline, you've worked out what you need, you've bought what you need, and now you've got to get it in. That will almost certainly mean a degree of standardization, and I know standardization makes people nervous. I understand that. There are some standards which are not at all controversial, and many are mandated. DICOM, use of HL7, version 2, and eventually HL7 FHIR although I suspect that's slightly further on. The use of the National Interim Clinical Imaging Procedures Code Set, or NICIP, and or SNOMED, clinical terminology. These are all well understood and not particularly controversial standards. The use of IHE and XDSI is a little bit more controversial and certainly is not mandated at this point. But it may well be the way we go in the future. It's something that we're looking at, thinking about. Use of the NHS number, as I'm sure you're all aware, that already is mandated in the NHS, in England certainly. Whether it's universally used and whether it's used consistently is a slightly different question. And I'm well aware that there are very particular challenges around the NHS number in relation to DICOM and how it handles particular identifier fields. So it's something to be thinking about, but it's definitely the direction of travel. One of the more positive elements of the pandemic has been that an awful lot of patients now know their NHS numbers where they didn't know them 18 months ago. So that's an interesting phenomenon and will perhaps drive better use of NHS number in future. I've called them harmonisations here because I know that this idea of standardisation, as I say, makes people nervous. And also, these are not mandated standards in the sense that DICOM or HL7 is a mandated standard, but they are things where everybody in that network is going to have to reach a degree of agreement about how they are done and how they work. And they may be things like referrer and location codes, appointment slot lengths, RIS statuses. All of these things, if they vary too much within network, will slow down the workflow and cause a problem. Similarly, there are some policy and procedures which are effectively configured into your RIS systems. So scanning protocols, for example, may well be configured into your vetting module on your RIS. So again, across a network, we would expect people to be able to get to a point where the scanning protocol for a CT head in Trust A is exactly the same as in Trust B. Now, I've said that slightly flippantly and glibly. I realise it's not that simple. There is a lot of clinical input required to any of those conversations. A great deal of work has to be done around understanding what degree of standardisation is clinically useful and clinically appropriate. So I don't want to minimise the idea that that's a simple thing. It really isn't. But it has to be thought through and it has to be worked through. You're also probably going to want to change your service and user support arrangements so that you get a degree of scale, which would be good. Economies of scale, I meant to say. But also consistency. So user identity management, access controls, help desk procedures. How do the trust staff in, or staff in Trust A and staff in Trust H have to phone a different number? Is there scope for harmonising those arrangements so that everybody is getting the same level of service and in the same way? Your disaster recovery and business continuity arrangements absolutely will require to be reviewed, particularly if you're doing major changes to systems. So some things to think about. The last thing on this toolkit element, on this approach element, is data migration. Data migration has caused some pain, a lot of pain in the past to people as they've changed systems. The situation is improving. Data migration is not as painful as it used to be, but it does still need thinking about. The amounts of data that we're migrating these days are very large. And the clinical safety implications of that migration process going wrong in any way are significant. So it's something that if you're planning to change systems and do data migration, my advice would be start thinking about it as soon as you can. And involve all your suppliers in that. So not just your incoming suppliers, not just those who are doing the data migration, but your incumbent suppliers, potentially your outgoing suppliers. try and think about it as early as you can and communicate as widely as you can, because it does carry a certain amount of difficulty and challenge with it. I'll leave it at that. So moving on to specifically in relation to NHS England and Improvement. So apologies to anybody from the Four Nations or elsewhere. You might want to close your ears at this point. In late last year, the government's capital spending review allocated us some funding to recover and expand diagnostic services, which took a considerable hit during the pandemic. So there are a number of initiatives out there. The introduction of community diagnostic hubs is one, but there's also funding very specifically targeted towards IT. So IT and connectivity is seen as key to the next iteration of diagnostic services. So we're seeing investment in pathology IT infrastructure and systems, for example. We're also seeing the National Imaging Transformation Programme has now partnered with NHS Digital to form the Diagnostics Digital Capability Programme. And we will be looking very specifically at improvements in imaging and pathology IT and informatics, looking to support the development of these networks and the maturing of these networks. So what does that mean in practice? So in 21-22, we will be allocating some funding around improving the sharing infrastructure. So this is about potentially an interoperability platform, a VNA, the elements we looked at a moment ago, which allow trusts to link up their RIS and PAC systems and share their information a little bit more rapidly and efficiently, and move towards this idea of a global patient search and a shared reporting workflow. We'd also like to see an increase in the use of home reporting. So home reporting for radiologists and reporting radiographers has been around for considerable time, but understandably received quite a shot in the arm during the pandemic. People became much more interested in allowing their staff to work at home, both to allow them to continue work when they're shielding, but potentially to allow them to keep themselves safe, to keep themselves isolated from potential infection risk. So very interested in moving that forward. We know that there are technical challenges and also implementation challenges with home reporting. So looking very closely at that. We're also looking at clinical decision support. We're interested in understanding whether supporting referrers at the point at which they are making the decision about an imaging investigation, providing them with access to RCR guidance, specifically iRefer, will allow them to get to the best test for the patient a little bit more quickly without having to go around a loop of requesting a test, having that rejected and a suggestion made for an alternative test. If an AI algorithm can help them to make that decision at the first point in that chain, then the whole process will work better. We're also looking at reviewing and overhauling data in relation to imaging. So, as I've said, imaging as a diagnostic modality is relatively well served for data collections and a good understanding of things like capacity and workforce and all sorts of dimensions of imaging services we know quite a lot about, but we need to know more. We particularly need to look, for example, at the National Interim Clinical Imaging Procedures, because as the name suggests, that's an interim product. So if we need to move it onto SNOMED, to the overall direction of travel, then that's a piece of work that we need to get on and do. So there will be a project also looking at some of the data structures around imaging to see if we can improve the situation. So a little bit more detail on that. For the sharing infrastructure and the home reporting and the clinical decision support, the project approach takes the form of targeting funding. So as it stands at the moment, as Sean has already mentioned, we have asked for proposals from the system for what they would like to do in order to move these aims forward. So specific, tailored, local requests for potentially additional home reporting stations or additional VPN servers, or sharing infrastructure or VNAs or whatever it is, we have asked the local systems to tell us what they need, and we will allocate funding to those proposals, hopefully very shortly now. Similarly for clinical decision support, slightly different in as much as it's a slightly smaller scale investment, it's a slightly smaller scale project, so we will not be investing in every single NHS trust in relation to this, but we will be looking at a group of trusts to act as perhaps pilots, evaluations, so that we can understand how it works, how well it works, what is the effect on requesting patterns within a locality. The data standards review is being run rather more as a central goal, a central project rather. So a lot of it requires a very specialist input from coding and terminology specialists, for example, who are a very, very rare breed of creature. So we're hoping to corral some of them centrally and get them to help us out with that project as a central project. The end.
Hi, Moira.
I have no sense of the time. Was I over time, under time?
We have gone a little bit over, so what I'm going to do is, the beautiful thing about virtual conferencing is that no questions go unanswered, so I'm going to link the people who've asked some questions up directly with you, just because I'm conscious of people's time, with it being a last minute event, I just don't want to steal any time of clinicians that we already have done. So absolutely amazing.
My apologies.
Oh, no apologies needed. The content was amazing. The content isn't far more important, to be fair, so we need it getting delivered, and then we can further the conversation afterwards. So Bill has made some amazing comments regarding shared inventory equipment databases and things like that. So some really good questions coming through. So I'll link you up afterwards. And Moira, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Just before we go, what I was going to suggest is if we could share the slides post-conference, that'd be great. And in addition, we can provide the links to the National Imaging Transformation Programme that you were sharing information on as well, if that's okay.
Yep.
Brilliant. Well, Moira, absolute pleasure, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Cheers, Moira. Take care. Right, everybody, as mentioned, I do apologise we couldn't get those questions answered now, but we will get those questions directed straight over to Moira, and we'll link you up from there. So the next presentation, as mentioned, today's conference would not be taking place without one of our core supporters and sponsors. Today's supporter is Axon Radiology. We're going to be looking at supporting the NHS in delivering a regional sharing networks, but with a holistic approach. So good morning, Paul. How are you?
Morning, Sean. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I thought you fell into the mute trap then.
No, good. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for hosting us today.
Not a problem at all.
Chris
Morning,
has
Chris.
joined us. Hopefully we can hear you, Chris.
Yeah.
Hello. Morning, guys.
Got you both absolutely loud and clear. All we need to do, chaps, if we can, is make the slides full screen, and we're ready to go.
Okay, so you can see my screen, yeah?
See screen, yeah, we just need to change the display setting on it, make it full. That's it, just in the middle at the top there. The one.
Do I need to swap that then?
Yeah, if you click that, that should send us into full screen mode, and we should be ready to go. Right, so we've got you, Paul, we've got you, Chris. I can hear you both, see you both. We've got your slides, so I will. Oh, we've lost Paul a second on the camera, but I will see you both in 20 minutes for some Q&A. So thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Excellent. So you can see the presentation still, though, yeah?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Perfect. Yep, thank you guys for hosting us. It's an honour to speak here today and present what we believe will be a great support to the NHS and a game changer in radiology reporting. Thanks to Moira, that was very good. Plenty of support available from NHS England and Improvement, and I think that'll be very useful for a lot of people when they're feeling some of the challenges of this change moving forward. Presenting with me today is Chris, Sales Director of Sectra. He is responsible for overall sales of Sectra's portfolio in the UK and Ireland marketplace. And myself, I'm the General Manager of Axon Radiology. My background is within remote reporting for radiology and teleradiology, having worked for 6 years for one of the largest in the UK. I work alongside a highly experienced team at Axon, many years experience in teleradiology, radiology IT, and our clinical leadership team all have got a strong passion to do things a little bit differently. Okay, so our mission. Things have been the same for many years in UK radiology, with a strong reliance on outsourcing, goodwill and locums to keep up with the increasing demand and pressure on NHS radiology departments. And our mission really is to disrupt this model and do things a little bit differently, with the ultimate goal of saving the NHS money, improving the life of NHS radiologists and delivering excellence in patient care. So to do this, we've partnered with best-in-class tech tools in the market with Mitis Health and Sectra to deliver this ambition and create a more seamless and pleasant place for radiologists to be working. So what do? We provide essential reporting from our hub to seamlessly share images and reports internally or at a cross-consortium level, which creates a radiology network and gives the hospital a global view of workload. This is coupled with a best-in-class, no-compromise technology solution using VDI and streamed using a unique streaming protocol. Allows radiologists to connect from any remote location, that can be actually anywhere in the world, using 100% lossless VDI, and they can securely access our centralized PAC-based reporting platform through that VDI, highly secure and super fast. We leverage each care provider's own resources for their own benefit, giving confidence in diagnosis by supporting regional teleradiology or insourcing. And to enable this, we provide services such as workforce scheduling, allocation, prioritisation, to ensure that any work is reported in the most efficient way and by the most appropriate specialists available across the consortium. Once connected, Axon Radiology's virtual reporting hub supports you with teleradiology and subspecialty reporting for any additional capacity required that you might need to meet your demands, essentially acting as an extension of your in-house team through a more traditional outsourcing teleradiology model. So how does it work? Our centralised PACS-based reporting system integrates to your local hospital's PACS and RIS systems using both HL7 and DICOM interfaces, thus allowing for full query and retrieve of present and prior images and reports. With the unique Mitis VDI, it gives you exact in-hospital experience, allowing instant access to 100% lossless images to any radiologist in any location within the rules of credentialing that the trust and ourselves have set. And this is in line with Royal College guidance in terms of lossless imaging. It's very quick to set up with rapid deployment, and it's highly secure. So for cybersecurity and data protection, all images stay within the confinement of the secure HSCN network. All radiologists can be issued both a unique password as well as an authentication token in line with NHS digital standards for remote access. And the VDI streaming protocol transmits pixels within a highly secure AES 256 tunnel, which again is in line and actually surpasses NHS digital security standards. So no patient data actually leaves the secure HSCN data center network. It's just streamed to the radiologist's home or remote location. So here's a bit of a solution diagram overview. So if we start on the left-hand side with the radiologists, or in fact they could be pathologists or any diagnostic discipline, they would be sat at home or in any remote location in the world, and they can log securely onto the Axon Radiology Windows 10 VDI from their home. From there, they'll open a centralized reporting hub and PACS-based reporting client on the desktop. And once in, they use integrated voice dictation software to dictate reports. Our VDI solution allows this to be done highly securely, very fast, so within a matter of seconds rather than minutes. There's no downloading of images to be done with this solution. And again, nothing ever leaves the HSCN network. So it's streamed in much the same way how Netflix would be streamed to you at your home. Super fast, super secure, and it's one of the key differentiators in our solution here. When the study is reported and authorised, the report is instantly sent back to the RIS system of origin, and the Axon Radiology solution integrates with any RIS or PACS at the customer end, so it offers you the ability to seamlessly integrate and enable a sharing network across all of your hospital sites, regardless of the suppliers you have for RIS or PACS. When prior reporting image is required, it can be requested on demand and at high speed. And on the right of this diagram, you'll see that regional hospitals can plug into this network. So hospital A, B, C, D, E, F, they all might be part of a consortium. Also, pre-established imaging networks or consortiums can also plug in. So if you wanted to eventually join 2 consortiums together or create a national network, that could be done very easily. And also private or imaging organisations that collaborate with the NHS can also plug into this network very easily, the likes of InHealth or Alliance, people like that. Chris, over to you for the for your part.
Thanks very much, Paul. Interesting presentation so far, and really nice to hear what Moira had to say as well. But I think in kind of starting this dialogue with you guys at Axon, I mean, it was immediately obvious that excellence was very high on the agenda. If you could go to the next slide, actually, Paul, that would be great. Axon were looking to provide, as you've said, Paul, a best-in-class teleradiology service for the clients, the radiologists, the pathologists alike. And Sectra are independently recognised as the best-in-class PACS, and we have been for 8 consecutive years now. Very proud to hold that accolade. I think Axon needed a PACS provider that could handle the ups and downs of the live production clinical environment for streamlined reporting and a really high level of integration. So right from the very first meeting, it felt like there were a lot of synergies there, really. So if you could move to the next slide. Thanks, Paul. So just to start with here, Sectra's PACS is a true multimedia platform, and that means that we're able to ingest, display, and even have specialist tools for multiple specialties involved in that diagnostic care pathway. So if we take, for example, the complex journey of a breast cancer patient, for example, from first diagnosis within the screening program onto a symptomatic care pathway, with then further imaging, perhaps multiparametric MRI, histopathology imaging, medical photography, videos from surgery, for example, and the likes. All of this multimedia is compatible within the Sectra platform and viewer within a common user interface. So this means that when the patient is discussed within the MDT setting, for example, all the diagnostic information, subspecialty reports and imaging is available. So within the context of Axon, this means that you kind of future-proof to expand the reach into other diagnostic disciplines as and when the requirement dictates. So, but the Sectra solution isn't just capable of spanning multiple disciplines, we're also able to span multiple organisations, and we've enjoyed a lot of success in recent years providing large regional solutions in the imaging space. So we use multiple MRN and domain linking technology to respect the numbering schemas and present a consolidated patient record back to the clinician, irrespective of where that imaging was acquired. So coupled with the Mitis technology platform, who are able to provide ubiquitous access to the end users, as Paul has already said, Sectra are then able to ensure that patients are presented and organised appropriately to ensure the most efficient and risk-free reporting environment possible. Moving on there, Paul. But of course, we can't do this without the all-important RIS integrations to enable these seamless workflows. The Sectra PACS includes the capabilities for the ingestion of HL7 from the Axon client sites. And this means that orders are able to flow into the PACS. Reporting can then be performed within the PACS platform. And as Paul said, the results and reports are automatically orchestrated back into the source RIS, all without any manual administration whatsoever, thus improving quality and increasing efficiency. But of course, and as I say, this does require that the other important stakeholders are involved in that discussion. So just last couple of slides here from me. Thanks, Paul. So this enables Sectra to provide an ergonomic and seamless environment for reporting. Clinicians will have all of their insourced and outsourced work served up to them using a common user interface that is accessible from anywhere via that Mitis technology platform. The setup of the work list within PACS means that clinicians won't have to go searching for their daily work. It'll be immediately available with clarity of what work is yet to be done and indeed what is yet to be completed. And we can even use business logic within the platform to prioritize the work lists based upon SLA turnaround times, for example, or perhaps input from a variety of AI sources, for example, very much part of the discussion here with Axon. And to Moira's point earlier, around the use of standardization and harmonization, reporting within PACS opens up a wealth of possibilities, really. The capability of leveraging the Sectra structured reporting framework, for example. Novel reporting templates can be created to standardize reporting for conditions that might benefit from this type of structure. And here's one such example of a reporting template that's being used today for follow-up and surveillance of COVID positive patients. And again, as Moira said earlier, the PACS also includes a variety of connectors to allow FHIR integrations and in-context integrations with other systems in that ecosystem. And again, that reporting platform also includes that embedded VR facility, which can be served up over the Mitis VDI so that the clinician doesn't need to worry about desktop integration with other clients to facilitate their workflow. So long as they can reach the Sectra PACS, then everything else is handled automatically and seamlessly. And that's me. Thank you, Paul. Back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. So some people have said that there's a bit of issue with my sound, so hopefully I'm coming through okay to you, Sean. But yes, so just to thank you here. So thanks for that, Chris. That was great. Just to thank you here to the support from Soliton IT as well. One of the largest leading RIS suppliers in the UK, who have said they will allow quicker integration with Axon Radiology, etc., supporting NHS sites to ensure that this can be networked and integrated simply and seamlessly. So moving on to the workflow seen within this solution. So you had rapid access to reporting. So we've tested this with a number of radiologists within the clinical team, and I think it's coming out around 58, 59 seconds from logging on to the system to actually starting reporting. Now, in comparison to some other remote solutions, which can take a number of minutes, in some cases a lot longer, this can be quite frustrating and obviously can actually impact the wellness and the balance of work for the radiologist and also for the patient impacted for urgent care and things like that. This is a super efficient workflow, and the reason that one of the big focuses we had when designing the workflow and partnering with Sectra and partnering with other people was to ensure that it was super efficient, super slick, and ideal for the radiologists in terms of their working. Secure VDI solution means rapid access, highly secure, and it maintains that speed regardless of the size of data set. So you could have 1,000 slice CT scan that still will be downloading in a number of seconds. Location, again, regardless of location, we've tested over thousands of miles from here to Australia, also to South Africa, and basically it works as effectively as it would be if it was down the road. Some hospitals have doctors that are set up overseas, works super efficiently for that. It also doesn't require huge dedicated home broadband bandwidth that you need with some other solutions. You can actually do it on quite a small bandwidth, and you don't need huge desktops working at home. You just need a thin client. As Chris has covered, we've chosen the market-leading, intuitive, and radiologist-friendly PACS-based reporting with unified voice recognition. Axon Radiology will deliver training for the PACS-based reporting for any of the radiologists that aren't familiar with it and join us, or network users. PACS with integration with access to all current previous images and reports. PACS modules to support all work, so no changing workstations or opening up other applications. You can seamlessly scroll through them. That's AI, PET-CT, multi-parametric MRI. Seamless and instant transfer of completed reports back to the RIS of origin through HL7. fully customizable hanging protocol for all radiologists, bespoke rule-based configuration for image transfer and reports for each hospital, and it also supports the workflow and technology supports pathology reporting services as well. So our radiologists, very important that we have valued, happy doctors. We know that our radiologists are our biggest asset, and a happy radiologist feels valued, listened to and looked after will produce a high quality report. We have employed a dedicated radiologist wellness manager to look after our team, address any concerns and ensure that their voice is heard at senior management level. Radiologists receive the highest pay in the market and paid in the most tax efficient way possible as well. Our selection and governance criteria ensures top quality UK consultant radiologists dedicated to supporting the NHS, and a rapid reporting platform. So when we tested this, it's around 20% more efficient using Axon Radiology than conventional teleradiology platforms, making the doctors using the Axon Radiology model the most productive in the market. We believe that the more efficient our workflow is, the happier and less stressed the doctors working with us will be. So moving on to our services and what services we offer. So we have Axon Plus, which is our regional sharing, where you can plug into a fully managed regional teleradiology service, enabling regional sharing capacity, operational management of the service, and all-inclusive service, which allows you to use the Axon Extra virtual hospital as well to support any additional requirements for resource. Axon Extra is our teleradiology, where you can extend your in-house team, access to expert radiology reporting from the Axon virtual hospital. It's a cost-effective solution for extra resource, and it is cheaper than anything else in the market in terms of its overall value. Axon 100, powered by Mitis Health, is the no compromise home reporting solution with 100% lossless image guarantees. Digital pathology, so we provide your pathology department with central reporting, much in the same way as the regional sharing that we've spoken about, using the 100% lossless VDI and secure access. And we can include access to additional pathologists under our Axon Extra service. And independent audit as well, covering cause for concern, departmental quality assurance, and we actually deliver accountable evaluations and quality improvement strategies off the back of that. So pricing, as I said at the start, one of the big aims was to save the NHS money. So we believe in pay fair, charge less. Axon Radiology invoices the hospitals at a substantial discount below market rate, encouraging insourcing and delivering significant cost saving efficiencies. And pay fair, so Axon Radiology pays its radiologists the highest market rate for any scans reported, and by doing this we ensure we find the highest quality radiologists and also ensure a motivated workforce to support the delivery of additional NHS work. So whether they're doing insourcing or outsourcing, they're paid the same. There'd be no incentive for them to do any work for private companies over the insourced NHS work, thus motivating them to do the NHS work before the private work. Finally, just to run through the benefits, so saves the NHS money through less spend on outsourcing, because you're able to deliver a regional teleradiology service between your consortium, and also when you do additional resource, there's cost efficient compared to the market average. This supports you delivering the NHS regional sharing strategy that we've spoken about, or that Maureen's spoken about earlier. It provides a simple hassle.
We're just sorry to interrupt there, Paul. We're just losing you a little bit. I don't know whether you can come a little bit closer to your microphone, perhaps.
How's that? Is that any better?
Much better, much better.
Yes, okay. I'll support you in the delivery of the NHS regional sharing strategy that Moira spoke about. as well as saving you money because you spend less on outsourcing, because you're able to deliver a lot of the resource within your own consortium. And when you do need extra resource, it is at a discounted rate compared to market average. It provides a single hassle-free solution to manage reporting across hospitals. It empowers the NHS to deliver a sustainable and resilient diagnostic service without the increasing and unsustainable reliance on outsourcing or locums. It motivates your doctors to dedicate time to work for regional groups and not private healthcare or outsourced teleradiology. It also maximises the efficiency and productivity of your doctors across multiple sites and increases the access to subspecialty expertise. Also, that obviously benefits patients in terms of the equality in regional access to subspecialty reporting. As I said earlier, tested at about up to 20% improved efficiency using our platform. We can provide and support with reporting passports for cross-consortium insourcing with credentialing and full user access control. Supported by robust clinical governance and a learning environment, very important from our clinical team's point of view that it is within a learning environment and to develop and support doctors rather than just point out errors. Axon Radiology acts as a trusted, independent and neutral third party, removing regional bias. Again, quite important from some of the people that I've spoken with when creating these consortiums. There can be quite a lot of internal issues and discrepancies between each of the hospitals, and we would provide a neutral third-party provider to kind of liaise through with that development. And finally, and overall, importantly, it improves doctor wellness and supports sustainability for doctors to stay in the NHS happy for longer and enjoy their work. Thank you very much. Apologies if the sound dropped out in the middle there. I'm not sure why. Hopefully it was picked up. If not, happy to cover anything individually with people on any of these slides, or indeed take some questions now if there is any.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. That's absolutely brilliant, Paul. Yeah, we did have a little bit of sound dropping out, but what we're going to do is we'll get the whole slide deck re-narrated, get it sent out in the post-event deck, so everyone's got the full presentation clear as crystal. However, we've got quite a few questions to go through anyway, so let's get started. So Doug has asked, Doug represents the University College London Hospitals and has asked a couple of questions. We'll get started with this one. So what is the difference between Axon and Mitis? Are you the same organisation? Just going to run a poll in the background as well while we answer some questions.
Yep. Okay. So what was the difference between Mitis and Axon? So Mitis are a supplier to Axon. They supply the lossless VDI. They provide a unique, globally unique lossless VDI. So not perceivable lossless or any good for clinical review. It's diagnostic, guaranteed to be 100% lossless in terms of the quality that's received. And we implement that VDI solution in our Axon sharing solution to send the images from the data center securely and high speed to the remote location for the doctors. Mitis, as a separate company, offer home reporting solutions for radiologists who want to be set up home for a hospital to report for that individual hospital. They don't provide any of the networking, sharing, or teleradiology in-sourced solutions that Axon spoke about. So that they're simply a supplier to the organisation. Hopefully that answers that one. Happy to go into detail with that person individually if they want to reach out to me.
Yeah, we'll link you up post-event as well. So coming from Doug as well, if deploying a home reporting solution using your Mitis platform, what information about the patient would the radiologist not have access to? Would it include the full EHRS/RIS record as well as all imaging priors?
Yeah, so with this VDI solution, basically they have access to absolutely everything. So for both of these solutions, you have an exact in-hospital experience. So you're essentially just accessing your desktop in your hospital computer. So you're streaming everything that you can see from that desktop. So literally, if you've got a screensaver on there, if you've got your applications like Mirada or Terra Recon, if you want to access your RIS, your PACS, absolutely anything, all it's doing is simply allowing you access like a telescope view into that hospital desktop. So you have absolutely everything there.
Perfect. Brilliant.
It's not sending anything, it's not sending or downloading anything from the hospital to the home computer. It's simply streaming it. Hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, definitely. And as mentioned, obviously, Doug can reach out to you both directly after the conference. So moving on, Lawrence from the Imperial College has asked about 4 or 5 questions. So I'll run a double question now, Lawrence, if that's okay, because we've got someone else asking as well. So Lawrence has asked, does this pull prior image and how have you tested 8-bit grayscale?
Sorry, say the first part again.
Does this pull prior images?
Okay. Yes. So Chris, you probably can answer that one from a technical point of view better.
By all means, Paul. So yeah, when we receive the HL7 from the source RIS, what we are able to do is interrogate the system for any relevant priors that exist. Within the Sectra PACS platform, we're then able to initiate a DICOM-C move of that imaging up into the Axon teleradiology solution. And from there, they would all be presented as a single patient, and you would have the full imaging history along with any prior reports that have been involved in the diagnostic pathway for that patient.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Anything else to add, Paul, before we move on?
No, so there was a question around, the second part of that question was 8-bit grayscale.
Yes.
Testing it. So yeah, we have tested it. I'm not sure if the question was have we or how have we. So we have tested it. Yeah, so we tested it with local hospital medical physics teams. So that's all been tested, and we're happy for people to interrogate it, play around with any of the solutions that we've got and interrogate them and take a look and see how they perform, because we're really confident in them.
I was going to say they must be robust if you're putting people up to that challenge. But yeah, we've got another question here from Taran. So Taran's asked there: does the reporting done with Axon does the reporting done with Axon become integrated with individual trust reporting? Thank you very much for the question, Taran.
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So does it become integrated with hospital reporting?
Yeah, so does the Axon reporting integrate directly with the trust reporting? Yeah,
so if you mean does it go directly back to the RIS, yes, it goes back to the RIS of origin. So whether it be reported by a doctor for hospital A, by a doctor from hospital C, who is the most available specialist at the time within the consortium, that person will report on it, and it will go directly back into hospitals A's RIS, so the RIS of origin. And that'll be exactly the same case if it goes from hospital A and there's no one in the consortium available, and it goes to a radiologist from Axon, so the virtual hospital, that will be reported and sent back into the RIS of origin as well.
Absolutely brilliant. And a question from Natasha: so how come I can send my images to Axon at home but not in my major trauma centre?
How come I can send images to Axon at home but not in my major trauma centre? I mean, that's quite a difficult question to answer, because I don't know what major trauma centre or what the setup they have is. If they plugged into our solution, then as far as I understand it, they would be able to, and there shouldn't be any issue. They might have some very, very specialist kind of wacky tech setup there, in which case we need a chat with some of our technical guys. I'm not a technical guy by any means. So yeah, happy for that person to reach out to me directly, and I'll put them in touch with the relevant people, and we might be able to support that. Sorry if I don't really fully understand the question on that one. But
no, it's okay. Thank you, Natasha, and we'll link it, as mentioned. We'll get to link you in with the support team from there. So last question, I thought it's quite a relevant one, because obviously people in different areas and stuff and different requirements. But what are the minimum bandwidth requirements for this solution? Download, upload, ping, and jitter.
Yep. I should know that, and I don't. Chris, do you remember that from our conversations with our tech guys?
Oh, I'm afraid I don't. I'm afraid I don't, Paul.
Okay, fine. No, I've just been texted by one of the tech teams. So 30 meg down, 10 meg up is what we like. I mean, it's been I believe it's been tested under lower than that, but we like it to be that so that we can ensure and guarantee everything that we like to guarantee.
Yeah. Well, Chris, Paul, absolute pleasure as always. We have got a few more questions. I will link you up after the event. Just to clarify, we will re-narrate the slide deck and get that sent out post-conference as well. So yeah, Chris, Paul, any last comments before we move on?
I just wanted to add to that last bit. So with the 30 meg and 10 meg up, it can go much lower for the actual reporting side, but we need it to be that high, I think, for the voice recognition. So that's the minimum for the voice recognition transfer. Otherwise, there's potentially issues. But yeah, that's great. Thank you. I know we've overrun. Apologies. Hopefully, everyone can still make the rest of the conference. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sean. Really well organised event again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Right, everybody. Yeah, as Paul said, we are running slightly over, but hopefully it's all sounding great and being relevant, and more importantly, it's on you two all. So next up, we've got Struan Wilkie. Struan is representing NHS Grampian. It's consultant radiologist, clinical lead for radiology IT, UCD, medicine, and unscheduled care. It's some titles. How is Struan? You can hear me okay?
Hi there, I can hear you fine, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Brilliant. Yep, and we've got your slides up. I told you, smooth as silk, Struan. I had no doubt.
So I just wanted to check that I'm seeing the slides okay. That's great.
Yeah.
I might just turn off my webcam just now, just so I don't interfere with the stream for that.
Yep, no worries, Struan. What I'll do then, I will jump ship for 20 minutes and I'll see you afterwards. That's
great. Thanks very much. Okay, well, thank you to people for inviting me along to join this webinar event. Looks good so far. As Sean just mentioned there, quite a title range that I have, but I'm mainly a consultant radiologist based in the north of Scotland, but I'm also clinical lead for radiology IT, and recently took on the UCD role for medicine and unscheduled care in my local hospital. So I've got a couple of disclosures to make. One is that I'm not going to mention or discuss specific vendors. What this presentation is really about is the general principles and the experience of essentially setting up a sharing network up in the north. But I will disclose that I am actually the clinical director of Axon Radiology. So what I hopefully want to cover in the next 20 minutes is to look at three principal areas. So looking at the past, what we had as challenges, the present, and what we ended up learning from that with some pitfalls and also the opportunities. And then looking to the future, what I would consider the next steps and potentially what NHS England should consider when setting up these networks. So if we look back at the past, just as a brief overview for people, to set the scene, about 2005, 2006, Scotland went through sort of a consolidation of digital PACS within the country. We ended up with a common shared PACS system, but RIS's, the Radiology Information System, was kept separate. Electronic patient records were by and large not used initially, but have started to filter through, although not every board has a fully integrated one, and certainly when it comes to electronic radiology requesting, that is not something that's rolled out across the country. Scotland obviously is a large geographical area. We've got 15 distinct health boards, so getting everyone to agree on things is sometimes a bit of a challenge. But with a population of approximately 5 million, we do a roughly 3.8 million studies per year, and that is hopefully reported by about 350 consultants. Back in 2012, between 2012 and 2015, we went through a vendor PACS upgrade, and that was just purely for the PACS system and the National Archive. So essentially, we could share images. Image acquired in board A was instantly viewable in board B. And as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. But with radiology, it's also the report. So we ended up getting the facility to actually have reports done in board A, and they would also be viewable in board B, assuming that that report had been had been done, and that was via the National Archive. Obviously, the National Archive was where we could store all old historical studies and also the reports, principally from about 2010. So essentially, when you look back at it, there were lots of challenges around that time. Acquisition was outstripping reporting. We knew that. We'd seen that with the volume and complexity of scans that were being done. There was also the subspecialism within radiology, and specifically needing specialist interest radiologists to review and report. We were made, certainly we're made aware that some boards had some spare capacity, although this is not overly so. It wasn't a case of that radiologists were sitting doing nothing. It was just that their job plans facilitated them some time where they may have been able to report more had that been available to them. However, radiologists in Board A, for example, could not just report for Board B. Principally, this all stemmed around employment rules and governance issues. And in some ways, it would be great if a radiologist had a passport. But what we really wanted to look at was, how do we do cross-boundary reporting? How could we set this up? What were the challenges that we would experience and face? Reporting what would be needed to be reported. Obviously, there's a huge gulf between cross-sectional complex studies and plain film, but initially always a patient's journey will usually always start with some sort of plain film, usually a chest x-ray. We had also had the local radiologists. Some places had a lot of radiologists, just from where they were geographically, and then there were other places where they may only have had one or two. Insourcing or waiting list initiatives were used, but that led to some challenges, which I'll mention in the next slide. And then it was a case of, how could we get bank radiologists to do outsourcing work or regional or cross-boundary reporting. As I mentioned, insourcing did give some challenges, and that is from the experience locally for me, in that what we found was that some people were given batches of studies to do, but also some people liked to swap. I use the word cherry picking because I think it kind of covers the reasons probably for that. It's a case of, well, why should I report a skeletal survey when it'll take me ages to do that when I could report 10 chest x-rays? But you also had the challenges of people saying, I don't want to report that, I want to report a CTKUB. But it really was driven by the fact that we needed to, one, value the staff, and we also needed to put patients at the centre of everything that we did. In terms of management of the team, it's a case of, well, the value that we have of radiologists or reporting radiographers, but also, as we'll come on to, the job flexibility. IT support, having said that, is not 24/7, certainly in the NHS up here. While some systems are supported 24/7, such as servers, we found that in terms of radiology, this wasn't necessarily the case, and it was a case of what each board would deem as a critical system for support. So bringing us up to where we are now. So back in 2016, we went through a process where we looked at how to connect up essentially 14, 15 health boards, each with their individual risk system, but a common PACS. And we came up with a shared reporting platform, which was risk-driven as our national reporting solution. There have been connections made pretty much to most boards, although that has been a slow process, and we'll come on to some reasons as to why that was. But essentially where we are now is that we have the ability, certainly on site, to donate to the reporting platform, and a report comes back directly into the local board RIS. So if a radiologist in site B is reporting that, that report will go back into the donating board's RIS directly. That uses the PACS system. As I say, it's mainly for on-site. We have, obviously with COVID, been looking at the off-site capability, but that in itself has led to some challenges, which again, I'll talk about later. So it's a case of, when you look at it, it's a case of, was that job done? And like everything in radiology and in modern medicine, not quite. It's worth mentioning, and discussing the pitfalls, and these are learning points which I hope to share with you in NHS England to hopefully point out some areas which, as a clinician, wasn't necessarily something that came to mind for me, but certainly as we've progressed, we've learned a lot, and I've certainly picked up a lot of IT skills and knowledge. But when we look at the information governance, we didn't actually have a common one. It was more to do with each individual board having its own clinical governance structure, information governance, and sometimes they didn't have a common agreement, and it was up to be each board had to get it sorted. That in itself was also with IT. It wasn't centralized, although there is a central program. But again, each board had a different way of solving different issues and problems. Now, the infrastructure again is variable. Some places had VPN, some had different types of VPN, some had no VPN and used web interfaces. But essentially, there was a high variability, and it was probably fortunate where I am that our board was a bit more forward thinking and had certainly made the progress with a VPN setup. And certainly when it came to encryption, there was also issues around that when we were setting up connection links, and HL7 also reared its ugly head sometimes in allowing us to connect to the various medical systems or risk systems that we had to interact with. In terms of workflow, there's obviously differences between what is done locally within your own department and what could be done nationally. And whilst we had representatives from each board on it, it was getting agreement and a workable solution, because there was no size fits all. And one point that we certainly learned was about study locking. So in terms of if a study is donated to the national system, that becomes locked in the local system. And if the patient happens to be admitted as an emergency and you want to report that CT that was done as an outpatient only a few days ago, that could lead to issues. Workarounds were very much manual. But with the evolution of workflow management, that is becoming less of a problem, although it still is there in the background. Now, critical alerts, which all radiologists will know about, there's been lots of discussion about this nationally, and again we had to have a workflow put in place, not just nationally but also at local levels. What do we do with any critical finding that's found? Where does that get dealt with by? Again, it's an admin manual process, and ultimately there has to be documented processes put in place and looking at accountability, who is taking on that responsibility. That leads us on to then talk about something that radiologists always love, which is the radiology events and learning, or what used to be called discrepancy, but we won't talk about that. But that in itself also had to have its workflow, not only national but also local. How do you deal with events which are critical, duty of candour, all these areas which we kind of know are there, but then when you're actually faced with not only having to deal with it locally, but you also have to consider what happens when somebody from another area reports your study. How does that get fed back, and who deals with anything that has to come from it? And that in itself has its own governance structure, but again that had to be agreed at a national level, but also integrated with the local setup as well. I mentioned integration, and essentially that just stemmed down from standards, HL7. Some systems we didn't have specific HL7 interfaces, so we had to get them created. And certainly in our own experience, we had to move from a different type of interface, which was very useful for the way we worked, to move to an HL7. And there's not so much, what we learned was there's not a like for like, there's not a like for like mapping. When you move from certainly something like Oracle Views and you move to HL7, there's not a specific like for like. And certainly with COVID, when it came to offsite connectivity, we had to look at more imaginative and innovative ways of using radiologists at home who were shielding. And that in itself has had issues, certainly with voice recognition. How do you get workstations configured and set out to users at home? Because if they're using our own VPN solution, they needed to have these systems pre-configured with the person's profile, and then who did the setup. And I do remember sometimes having to talk colleagues through how to set up and connect monitors. But moving on, we did find that sharing of images is now easier, but it's always about having more information, and certainly the patient history is very key to a radiologist's interpretation of an imaging study, especially when you're only maybe given one prior, and that prior might not make reference to any previous history or surgical history that the patient has had. Useful information, I do find in some cases referrals are very, very sparse in the amount of information that's given, and that in itself can either lead to a follow-up, which, you know, if it had been reported potentially by a local person, might not be necessary. But if that information was made available, then the radiologist offsite could easily report it to the same level. We also looked at theories of how examinations are coded, and there is a bit of variability between sites, and that in itself, when it comes to displaying with PACS, can lead to issues with how PACS displays certain images or pulls them. And you need to have an intelligent way of mapping that. As I mentioned, the EPR has variable deployment, and despite best efforts, EPRs are not interconnected. So if it's within one board, it won't connect directly with the neighboring board. And that in itself means that the only way you can get access is to have access from the home board. There's such a rich amount of information can be stored in clinic letters with history and symptoms. And for us, certainly examination findings in previous surgery, I personally find that that's usually why I look up either a GP letter or a clinic attendance letter. And certainly having access to that in a quick manner without having to wait or follow up or ask for more information certainly reduces the callback rate, and certainly reduces the time waited to get a report. That would lead you certainly on to your labs, pathology and endoscopy, for example, all rich stores of critical information in some cases, especially when you're maybe interpreting a CT colon and they haven't quite put where the lesion was that they wanted you to check. So again, just having that full integration within one platform would be of a benefit. As I said before, one of the biggest things was to do with governance and a common structure, and certainly, if I went back retrospectively, I would say planning and maybe engaging earlier would certainly save time, because it does take time. And that's the same for the IT structure. Each place maybe has its different way of having things set up, has its different way of onboarding, and starting early certainly makes it a lot easier to allow you to have a standard package for linking into each network. So when one person links into the next network, then it's a lot easier. And certainly I would suggest going forward, that's something that is done. But then we mustn't forget the human resource and the value of radiologists and reporting radiographers. Certainly COVID has made us more aware of well-being, the workplace, social distancing and home working. Home working certainly has become more to the fore nowadays. And as it is, whilst we can do it with the VPN, it's still not as, essentially as seamless as it is when you're actually in the hospital using a workstation there. With all that, you still need to have a good culture. And the team working aspect of it, we have regional MDTs where we can discuss things via video conferencing, but the fact that we can actually, if we needed to, if something hadn't been reported, we can now actually share that and have that reported by the specialist who's hosting or chairing the MDT. That can certainly have benefits improvements for the patient. As a byproduct, essentially, on call could become more regional, and that obviously has good benefits for training for trainees. I mentioned connectivity. So one of my colleagues does do reporting with mammography from home, and I asked him, I said, how long does it take you to get your mammogram downloaded? So he tells me about 30 seconds for just one mammogram to download. So essentially, if you take it, and I know we're not supposed to count how many you report, but if you take an average, you're talking about in a 4-hour session of about 24 minutes lost just waiting for an image to show. And I've experienced things like where images fail to download, and that can either be due to loss of connection or a blip in the VPN. Again, all things that could be and should be improved upon. And certainly looking forward, we do have that with the advent of VDI, and certainly with the benefit of lossless VDI, you've got a zero wait because essentially the images appear as if they're actually on a department workstation. You also cover the issues of information and IT governance, thinking about what happened in Ireland with their cyber attack. That wouldn't be something you need to consider because you've already got the endpoint. The endpoint's been moved not to the house, but actually moved further back into the corporate infrastructure within the NHS. And one of the biggest things is really the close clinical driven with IT collaboration. IT will tell you what they can do, but as I look at it and say, well, if Netflix can stream 4K video, then we should be able to too. And certainly cost reductions, if you have central reporting, you can leverage workflow tools for better use of available reporters. You can know when somebody's on annual leave, etc., and you can then hopefully, with intelligent workflow management, you can actually prioritize what studies need to be reported first. And that ultimately looks at improving patient care. As I said before, with integration with EPRs and the full availability of patient history, that would reduce and prevent unnecessary further examinations, and ultimately, with the intelligent workflow management, give you the right radiologist at the right time with the right examination. I suppose some wishes from my perspective is the use and integrating of AI. I think AI will ultimately, over the next 5 to 10 years, be more involved with the prioritization and workflow management, but also with the second pair of eyes and assistance to the radiologist. Interesting article recently published was that 60% improvement of a radiologist with AI when they're looking at a chest x-ray. And also with critical finding management, it could become less of a manual task and potentially risky if an AI tool was there to pick up terms that are used and to flag them up instantly to the referrer. I think lastly, I would say, I know that from the last data that I saw that NHS England is regarded as has about 10 times the population and 10 times the study numbers. But if you were to look at this satellite network and think of each satellite as an individual radiologist, by linking them all together with interconnected built-in redundancy, I think that is the way forward. And yes, that a central common reporting platform streaming the images means that you can report from anywhere. Okay.
Hi, Struan. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. I'll just switch on my video.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Absolutely brilliant. Very, very comprehensive. Got a few questions come through, so we'll just crack on, keep things on time as possible. So yeah, Dr. Wilkie, given your network reporting experience, if you were to do things differently, what would you do? Great question.
Great question. It's multifaceted.
Yeah.
I think certainly based on the experience, there's multiple layers to it. But if you're looking at what is a quick gain for everyone's perspective, you want to have an integrated platform. You want to have a platform which gives you full visibility of everything to do with the patient. I know that previous questions were centering around, do you get the previous images? Yes, we solved that with our National Archive, but we needed a way to link all our RISs together, yeah. And we did get that. But in some ways, what we need is even more. Some issues that have arisen have been stemming from the fact that a radiologist wasn't aware of a patient's past history, so interpreted it as CT in a different way. That leads to then a local review. It just adds time And also, actually, if the patient happens to be at a clinic and the consultant says, "Oh, we picked up this in your CT," and then you say, "No, it's nothing to worry about," there's obviously anxiety placed on the patient unnecessarily. So it just makes the whole system a bit better. So if I was to do it really again, I was to get the integration and everything interconnected, and that will improve things.
Perfect, thank you very much. Just had a question come through from Anush, so we'll get straight into that. How do you ensure governance and quality in the report from halfway around the world and accountability of mistakes? Great question, Anush, thank you. I'm not sure if he's referring to Scotland, by the way, being halfway around the world.
No, we're not quite halfway around the world. I think, so, I mean, essentially, I'll use the word discrepancy, real meetings. We obviously have local policies and local procedures to follow. But if you have somebody who is reporting from Australia, for example, they obviously still have to be registered and have registration in the country that they're reporting for. But we have to have a due diligence and due accountability for that. Essentially, from our perspective, if we've got a patient who has come to harm, there also has to be an investigation into that. But it's all about the processes, and whilst we have it locally, it takes it onto a different level when it comes to people who are out with the country. And certainly that's a challenge, but it can be overcome just by discussions and agreements, and start them early. I think the problem is that we tend to pick up these things later on,
when we kind of have to, rather than when we need to.
Yeah,
sounds about right. So just taking a few questions from Paul's presentation that we didn't quite get asked, solely because you mentioned mammography within the presentation, Stu, so I hope you can shed some light. Does your system support mammography? That's kind of already been answered. But if yes, how have you guaranteed 10-bit grayscale?
So I mentioned mammography because that was one of my colleagues who has done it up here. Yeah. Not with Axon. Axon is in the process of getting 10-bit. 10-bit calibration. I know that they can project at 5 megapixel. We've seen that, and it does support that. It supports the resolution. 10-bit codec is on its way.
Brilliant. Well, Struan, absolute pleasure to have you involved. Last question: are we okay to share the slides post-conference because we're being asked?
Yeah, that's fine.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, yeah, you take care on your travels back to the other side of the world, Struan. And okay. Yeah, real pleasure to have you involved. Do you want to say anything before we move forward?
No. Thank you very much, and hope everyone else got something out of that.
Definitely. Thank you, Struan.
Okay, bye now.
Take care. Thank you. Right, everybody, thank you so much for the engagement. Really impressed so far. Just keep them coming through. As mentioned, we're here to kind of benefit the sector. So yeah, moving straight forward. Really kind of honoured, humbled to have Jeanette Dixon involved today. Jeanette Dixon is, of course, the president of the Royal College of Radiologists. And we're going to be talking about some, hi Jeanette, we're going to be talking about some human factors from the implementation guide. So very good morning. Is it afternoon? No, it's afternoon. It flies. Yeah. Good afternoon, Jeanette. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, and good to see you. So if I do what Struan did, I think, and turn off my webcam while I'm presenting, yeah, can you still hear me? Can you still hear me? And if I show the screen and do my, have you got the full screen now?
We did have a second ago. It's just gone for the moment, but it takes a second sometimes.
Do you want to tell me when it's back?
Yeah, I'll give you a shout.
Oh, wait a minute, try that. Is that better?
Yep, got full screen now as well, Jeanette. So yeah,
so it's my web. I turned off the wrong button, didn't I? So life is like that. Right.
Thanks, Jeanette.
No problem. First of all, I'd quite like to say thank you very much for inviting me to chat. I am Jeanette Dixon. I'm the president of the College of Radiologists. But one of the things that I need to say, sorry, it's now not doing it. There we are. Oh, there we are. Sorry. Yeah. The conflict of interest is I am not a radiologist. So I think this is the view of my radiology colleagues and the views that have been reflected to us from our members and fellows, who are going to be the vast majority of people of medics working within the network, but not necessarily the biggest professional group. And I think, having listened to some of the talks, I think there are recurrent themes which are similar but not different. I'm putting a human factors perspective on it. What we need to do to win the hearts and minds to ensure that the networks, if they're technically set up and if they're organisationally set up and if the governance is robust, that the folk who are providing the service are comfortable to be within that service. So I'm going to talk a bit about what networks can and can't do, and I'm going to talk about the bit about the barriers that exist and the human factors we need to talk about. So I think we've touched on some of this earlier on. So what we're talking about is seamless and immediate sharing of all imaging, current and previous, on a regional basis, with those reports available to the person. We're also talking about access to clinically relevant information. I mean, Struan really put it very well. And as a bare minimum, I think the chemical and histopathological, but a full EPR and ideally primary and secondary care. What we would aim for the networks to do, especially, is support specialist imaging services in times of sickness, maternity leave or holiday. I think, you know, things like pediatrics or breast are the obvious ones, but I think, you know, it's those areas of specialty and rarity. And again, it's something about distributing the imaging reporting workload evenly throughout a region so that the patients get the best outcomes, because again, that's what we're all here for. And what might that lead to? Well, if we get all this right, it's going to be better for the patient, because how many of us have repeated an imaging examination because we cannot access the previous one? That's not good. It's not safe. It's not good. That will ultimately lead, I think, to better clinical outcomes for the patients. Also, providing, if possible, a more timely report will also lead to better outcomes. And I think we need to hold at the forefront the benefit to the end users, the patients, from this. I think it will generally incentivize insourcing, minimize outsourcing, which means that monies can be released for reinvestment back into imaging services. What we would hope it would lead to is a community of practice within a region, which would, you know, there's very much, when you start talking about insourcing or outsourcing, you get that, well, it's not really my radiologist from clinicians, or I have a relationship with my radiologist and so down the road doesn't report quite the way I do. And I think if you can build that team within a network, you can break down that barrier, and therefore you can mean that you're not double reporting images, and you've got confidence in what's coming out. And I also think it would allow for better understanding of the pressures in different parts of the system. So, for example, we constantly hear about, you know, we want to follow the patient nearer home, but the large tertiary specialist centre want us to do this imaging test with 5 different sequences. Do they really need the 5 sequences? We don't really have the capacity in the local DGH. We can do them, but we don't have the capacity, because that disadvantages other patients. So I think this is a good lever for harmonisation of protocols, for harmonisation of sequences, for all those things that often go into the too difficult pile. So what can imaging networks not do? And I think we have to be absolutely clear, they cannot close the existing workforce gap. They can help it, they can bridge it, they can release efficiencies, but they can't close that. As the RCR, I wouldn't be talking to you if we couldn't talk about the census report. This is, if not hot off the press, it's warm off the press. It came out a couple of weeks back, and this is the URL, and these are the headlines. So we've got massive increase in outsourcing. The shortfall figures are based on demand, but if you talk about funded vacancies, we are 20% short of the workforce on absolutely funded vacancies right now. So again, this is not a small problem, and coupled with the demand, it's a real worry going forward. Although we haven't really mentioned it, imaging services aren't just about imaging. The pictures, the reports, they are also about intervention and the face-to-face things. So what have we heard from our members and fellows, and what are we concerned about? And I think part of it's about employment. I think part of it's about the mindset of folk who currently work in the NHS, and about the training concerns. And I'll talk about all of those. So, I mean, people are very concerned about being employed not on nationally agreed terms and conditions. It's about, again, this is a spectrum over all the ages. It's not true of everybody, but a significant number are. I think there are worries about medical indemnity, which Struan spoke about, and the bureaucracy of working across multiple employers. These can be solved, but there is a worry there for folk who've not already done that. If you're talking about an imaging network where you're delivering, for example, face-to-face ultrasound, proper full-on IR, or simple biopsies, there is a worry about increased travel between sites and that a change to people's job plans. And I've put financial loss here because that's not a major issue here, but I think we do need to talk about that as well. The employment concerns we're hearing is about the loyalty to an employing trust or the prestige of a current employer. So there's this thing about, well, actually, I'm employed by Trust X. Trust X is a university trust. It's a teaching hospital trust. I've worked very hard to compete to gain employment here, and therefore I want to be loyal to my trust. They've been good to me. How do you get round that? Because that's a concern when you're talking about going from that trust to the network mindset. Again, there's the same thing in reverse. The colleagues in different neighbouring trusts, they are much less busy than I am. They do much less. They've got a nicer job plan. It's inequity, and I think there's an awful lot of people recognise that everybody's stressed, but if you have a feeling that the inequity is between different employers or different places of work, it's much more difficult to deal with that. If you feel that the problems are equitably distributed, you're much more likely to be able to cope with that. And as one of the previous presenters said, you know, a happy workforce is a workforce that works well, it improves patient safety, and it stays in the workplaces, which is what we need it to do. And again, there's something about if I'm reporting for my trust, there is an expert value for me locally. Will that be diluted because I won't be the sole reporter? I think we have to frame that in the context of what does the patient get out of that, and what do you get out of it as well if you come back from holiday to find that you don't have a huge backlog of your niche stuff. You just have the backlog that is there, that's there anyway. So I think the competition mindset I've alluded to before. 50 years ago, doctors were employed by the regional health authority to deliver healthcare to the region at the behest of the region. And so it's been a relatively short period of time where we've been employed by my trust for my employer. And I think we've shifted from the region to my employer. I'm sure we can shift back, but that needs to be thought about. And I think that comes with do we provide an absolute gold standard service to our patients and acknowledge but don't care about the fact that perhaps in other parts of the region there is a deficit? Or do we say what is the best way we can deliver the biggest benefit for the most patients within a healthcare system? And again, both from radiology but also from folk like myself who are interacting with my radiology colleagues. So it's not just my clinical colleagues in my trust, it's my clinical colleagues in my region who have a valuable radiology opinion. So yeah, we all want to talk to a radiologist face-to-face sometimes to talk through a problem, to talk through what's the best test, to talk through can you help me with the clinical picture I'm seeing? But we've been working really differently through the pandemic. Can we use that knowledge to lever that shift of mindset from my colleague that I can walk down the corridor to my colleague who I can have a relationship with over Teams generally, or over some kind of platform? I think the other bit of the competition mindset is that the reimbursement system does not favour cooperation. It favours you seeking to expand your market share as an individual trust. It does not look at the pathway, and it does not look at the best financial gain for the region. And I think if we can get that better, I think a lot of the issues around the loyalty to my trust would be improved. I think there are two concerns about the differential reimbursement and recognition of specialist skills and practice, such as interventional radiology being the obvious one, or complex cancer imaging. So these are very highly specialist things. they require a degree of reimbursement that isn't often recognised by tariff, and within your own trust you can move the money about. So you need the governance within a network to be able to do that, to ensure that you do not disadvantage those who do complex things. And again, there's the bit about private practice. I think we need not necessarily to dwell on it, but if you have a relationship with your local team, the networks could potentially destabilize that. You could be seen as, oh well, only the people who are the experts in the centre can report my scans, and I think we need to acknowledge that as an issue for folk. Training concerns are really coming to the fore, and I think the first thing to say is that training is absolutely essential for the continuation of the development of all professions involved in imaging. So you can't set up the network without talking about training across the board. And training reduces productivity, so it needs to be costed within the network to allow it to compete for support on a level playing field. There's no point in saying, oh well, so and so do so much work because they have no trainees, therefore we'll give them more of the resource, but we'll train the people in this part of the network because that's a loss leader. We need to be more transparent about the cost of training. And again, we need to recognise that we have talked a lot about imaging reports. My view of an imaging service is not the report. It is the added value of the clinically expert radiologist, be that in the report, but also be it in the face-to-face imaging or especially intervention. So what different services within the network may have to be configured in different ways, and we need to acknowledge that up front. We've recently, and I am very grateful, had a significant expansion of training numbers in England. In England, we've had some in Wales, but England have had a 10% increase this year. And we need to talk about that being factored into the network, because we need to think about how we have open access to training materials. It's no longer my training materials, it's the network's training materials. Training does not occur equally through networks, and if this is the first of multiple year increases in training, we need to harness every training opportunity, especially also with the disruption of COVID. Our trainees have specific needs they need to make up. We want them to join the workforce as clinicians, as consultants who are competent and confident as soon as they can, and therefore we need to maximise training opportunities. And therefore, we need to think about how we incentivise equitable distribution of training numbers across the network, because also, it's a very easy thing to go, well, it's all in a network, we can sit the trainees in the training hospital, in the large central training hospital, not through the DGHs. But we all know trainees tend to stay where they've trained. So if you don't expose them to different areas and locales, they don't tend to go there as consultants. And that is worse for patients. So how do we improve patient access to equity? We improve patient access by distributing trainees throughout all of the different areas to all training opportunities, to get them to see that there are different places you can work. And again, some trusts are able to incentivize training because they have a huge number of, they have the fewest vacancies. Nobody has an excess, but they have the fewest number of vacancies. Actually, if you're in a trust where you cannot, where you've got so many vacancies, you struggle to offer training well, then what you want to do is you want to bring folk in who are able to report. So you would bring in a locum rather than a trainee. You bring in a specialty doctor rather than a trainee. And therefore, we need to work out how to equalise the workload and reimbursement for training as a lever to give training the same prominence, especially where there are the gaps. So what can we do easily? We can actively promote networks where national terms and conditions are retained and protected. We can address indemnity issues early and robustly. We can address travelling issues early and transparently. And we can embed high quality training across all parts of the network. These are relatively easy wins. What can be done slightly less easily? Well, the quality, and here is now a shameless plug again, you've had one plug for the census, you're now getting a plug for the quality standard for imaging, which we and SCORE, the College of Radiographers, are invested in, and view as a framework to harmonise services, the sequences, the protocols, but also the advanced practice and novel roles. We know extended roles and advanced practice are not equitably distributed within the network. The QSI is a way for you to look at the quality and to share that best practice out evenly, and it's a lever to get that done quickly. So what's more tricky? And I think we need to talk about the new team. So the team isn't just the team in my hospital, it's that community of practice within the network that will build trust, and it will focus people, I think, on away from my trust and my patients to the patients in our local healthcare system, our regional patients. What's the best outcomes we can get for them? I think reforming the reimbursement system is very tricky, but I think we have to push that. We need to use it to ensure that training gets the line of sight it requires. We need to think about how we do complex procedures, and we also need to think about pathways. How do we incentivize innovation among pathways? But also there's an awful lot of bulk work out there that we need to acknowledge that cannot be disadvantaged. And what we need to think about is how we're going to close that workforce gap completely. We can narrow it with the networks, we can get efficiencies with the network, but the networking of itself will not close that workforce gap. So that's my presentation finished, and I will now stop sharing my screen. Well, I'll reshare my face, not necessarily the best thing, and stop sharing the screen.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. That's absolutely brilliant, really comprehensive presentation. Just before we move forward, I'm just conscious of time, Jeanette, I do apologise, we're not going to be able to stop questions. However, are we okay to share the slide deck post-conference? We are being asked. Yeah. That is absolutely brilliant. Well, Jeanette, as mentioned, do apologise, we can't answer some questions now, but I will send them across to you directly. But yeah, absolutely brilliant to have you involved. We have got a few questions coming through, so I'll get them linked up with you, and thank you so much again.
Okay, no problem. Good to see you. Thanks for the invite.
Jeanette, yourself as well. Thank you. Thank you, Famid, and everybody else getting the questions in. As mentioned, we'll link you up post-conference. I do apologise about this, but speakers are under some time constraints because the conference only developed a couple of weeks ago. So please bear with us. Yes, we've got Wendy Preston next up, Head of Nursing Practice, Nursing Department, the Royal College of Nursing, and her colleague Linda, who's a Professional Officer for the Clinical Imaging Society of College of Radiographers. Do apologise, full mouthful there. Linda, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Sean.
Hi, Linda, how are you?
Yep, good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. It's just nice to see sunshine coming through people's windows. Yeah, really nice.
It's the first time we've seen it here in a long while.
I know, I'm going to the Jurassic Coast this weekend as well, so we're just hoping for good weather because it's pretty wild down there otherwise.
Yeah, lovely part of the country, but yeah, absolutely, you want some nice weather. So Wendy's going to start. I'm not sure if Wendy's joined us yet.
No problem at all. And we'll just hold on for a minute or two. How have you found the presentations, Linda? Have you managed to have a listen in, or any comments at all on them?
I've literally just joined in the last 5 minutes, I'm afraid. Yeah,
No, that's
just
all right.
you know, we sort of acquired this spot at fairly short notice, didn't we? Thanks to Wendy and thanks to you. So yeah, it was a bit of a squeeze today, but very happy to be here.
Brilliant. We've not got Wendy online at the moment, Linda.
I think Wendy had a quite a closely programmed meeting, didn't she? But she said that she would be logging in at 12:45. So
we shall hold on.
It probably makes sense just to wait a second for her. Thank you.
Definitely. How's your workload been then, Linda, over the last 18 months with COVID, etc.? Has there been any reflections or anything?
It's been a challenging time, hasn't it? Trying to keep up from the beginning, really trying to keep up with all the changes in guidance that were coming from all different directions and try and support the workforce through this. So yeah, really challenging time, but starting to see evidence of, you know, a little bit of relief on some of those pressures. So Wendy's here now. Lovely.
Hi, Wendy.
Hello.
Are you okay?
Yes, thanks. Apologies, I couldn't get in. So
Not at all. Don't need to apologise. Like I say, just really humbled to have you involved. It's been so short notice, so thank you again. Anyway, I've done enough talking. I will let you both crack on, and I will see you in 20 minutes for some questions.
that's lovely. Thank you very much. Just bear with me a moment while I get my screen to come up.
No problem at all.
So thank you. I'm Wendy Preston. I'm Head of Nursing at the Royal College of Nursing. I've also got a couple of clinical posts. I am an honorary respiratory nurse consultant in Warwickshire and an advanced nurse practitioner for the 111 service, also in Warwickshire. So thanks for the invite today. And Linda and I are going to do a little bit of double act. So really wanted to talk about our updated joint guidance. It's clinical imaging requests from non-medical qualified professionals. Originally developed in 2006 in a collaborative approach led by the Royal College of Nursing, which is the professional body. What we're talking about today is the 3rd edition, and we published it just a few weeks ago at the end of April. This update has been led by the RCN in collaboration with the Society of College of Radiographers, and most of the presentation will be from my colleague Linda from the College of Radiographers. And we're really pleased to have a forward from the Royal College of Radiologists, who support the guidance and have really emphasised autonomy. So I just wanted to, before I hand over to Linda, just have a little bit of personal reflection. So I just wanted to reflect back, just to sort of set the scene a little bit, to a clinical scenario that has been in my mind all the way through as we progressed this update. So approximately 5 years ago, I was still in clinical practice as a full-time consultant nurse. My background's respiratory, but working in a small district general hospital as a consultant nurse, my remit covered all of acute medicine, emergency department and ambulatory care, which was really my baby, and sort of developed it, and it's now the same day emergency care unit. I was on this particular day, I was leading the daily ward round on acute medical ward. As most acute medical wards, had 3 consecutive consultant-led ward rounds all going on at the same time, with about approximately 16 patients each. I had a registrar, probably a ST3 at the time, and a junior doctor, I think an FY2, that were presenting patients to me, and as accountable clinician, I was overseeing the diagnosis and management planning. And one particular patient comes to my mind, who was on the query pulmonary embolism pathway. My clinical assessment was that this wasn't the usual presentation. The patient was in very severe pain, and it was very unusual. For the sake of time, I won't go through much clinical detail, but I did suspect a complex pulmonary embolism, and after collaborating with a respiratory colleague, we requested an urgent HRCT. And as a nurse, I'm very good at completing clinical information and clinical question, and documenting that all effectively on the form. The patient in question remained in pain, and on inquiry I learnt that the request had been returned as my authority did not extend to this particular investigation, as there'd been a debate. We'd got that, I should. There was questioning whether it wasn't the formal PE pathway, i.e. I could only request a CTPA, and cut a long story short, there was a lot of confusion, and even though I did have authority, you know, it was refused. And to help things through, the registrar ended up requesting the test. The results came back as expected. That was a complex saddle pulmonary embolism, which was causing some tension. The patient was then treated accordingly with urgent transfer to our local another hospital and their cardiothoracic unit. And the registrar and the FY2, I think they were, you know, a bit embarrassed, but they particularly thanked me for the learning experience and how they really enjoyed being on a nurse-led ward round, and how it, whilst it being very new, they found it really interesting and rewarding, and it was all a little bit embarrassing at the system, and at the end of the day the patient was in more pain. I found this frustrating as I developed the ambulatory PE pathway. I was the co-author at the time of the British Thoracic Society guidance being developed, and then that went on to subsequently being quality standards. And because of this expertise, I was the clinical lead across the trust for pulmonary embolisms and also community acquired pneumonia. So I know this is a bit of an exception case. However, it was the consequence of a rigid process. So I was so pleased that when we updated the guidance that we've just published and we're going to talk about now, I was so pleased that within the introduction, we have the following statement, that it is important to note that these advanced practitioners can progress to higher levels of practice, such as consultant, clinical lead, directors. And it's useful to review their local IRMA referrer entitlement as their scope of practice may have changed, further developed, and a wider range required. So I just wanted to share that reflection and sort of set the scene really as to why it is important that we have good guidance but also systems in place. And I'd like to hand now over to Linda for the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Wendy. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn my camera off again immediately, just so that I can concentrate and so that you can see my slides better. So I must just say, although I am a professional officer at the Society and College of Radiographers, it was actually my colleague Maria Murray who was involved with writing the guidance alongside Wendy. But Maria and I both welcome any opportunity to talk about radiation protection. So thank you. So next slide, please. If we just have a think about the key considerations, and actually Wendy's really nicely gone through a really good scenario. But when we're talking about non-medical referrers, we're actually probably more appropriately describing nursing, midwifery and allied health professional referrers. So non-medical is a term that we're so used to saying, so I'm going to keep using that, but I think just to bear in mind that sometimes registered health professionals might feel that it's a little bit reductive to call them a non-anything, but it is a recognised term, so I'm going to use it, but just to make that point. So non-medical referrers, we know, play a really important role in the delivery of healthcare. They manage patient pathways, as Wendy's just described, and contribute really effectively to healthcare delivery across all levels of care. We believe that they will be instrumental in the evolution of community diagnostic hubs. And this guidance really supports not only existing non-medical referrers, but perhaps more importantly, the new and developing referrers to enable them to establish safe and effective referral pathways and to enable radiology services to support them to do that. And I should probably just also stress that what I'm going to talk about is specifically non-medical referrers, but actually applies to all referrers. Next slide, please. So if we just remind ourselves about the legal framework and legal entitlement to be a referrer, and this is defined by the Ionising Radiation Medical Exposure Regulations of 2017, as we fondly know and love as IRMA, or IRMA 2018 in Northern Ireland. And IRMA defines 4 duty holders: the employer, the referrer, the operator and the practitioner. And it says that anyone who's a registered healthcare professional can be a referrer. And this is further defined by the National Health Service Reform and Healthcare Professions Act of 2002. But it's not just enough to be a registered healthcare professional. You also need to be entitled by the employer providing that service to act in that role. And that's the service receiving the referral. And entitlement should be made in writing and should detail the scope of entitlement. And as Wendy's personal experience really highlighted nicely, we haven't spoken about this beforehand, so it's really nice to hear that, that example, Wendy. Your scope of entitlement as a non-medical referrer should reflect your scope of practice, but importantly, as your scope of practice extends and as your experience, skills and knowledge grow, so should your scope of entitlement grow to reflect that. And that should be done as a formal process so that the writing, the written evidence keeps pace with your growing experience, skills and knowledge. There's another important aspect of the legislation just to bear in mind at this point, and that's that under Schedule 2B of IRMA, it says that we need to have written procedures to identify duty holders. So this applies to all referrers, so that the person receiving the referral knows who the person that sent the referral is and that they're entitled to do that. Next slide, please. So what do we need to think about in terms of training? Well, a little bit unfortunately, there's no requirement under IRMA for a referrer, and specifically a non-medical referrer, to have any additional training over and above their professional registration. But what IRMA does say is that they must understand their responsibilities as a duty holder and they must comply with the employer's procedures. So to achieve that, most employers tend to specify a radiation protection course, some sort of dose awareness course that enables referrers to understand the levels of dose associated with the examinations they're requesting. And they also need to be familiar with the referral procedures and the referral guidelines, and that is a requirement under IRMA. And this is typically done through using something like iRefer. And iRefer is not just a system, obviously, to help somebody to achieve that referral, but it's also an educational tool. It shows the list of examinations and the class of dose associated with them. So it helps referrers, I think, to learn as they refer in the non-medical aspects. So in terms of governance, how do we ensure that non-medical referrers and any referrers actually continue to do so in a way that supports safe practice and it complies with the law? So referrals mostly will be audited for compliance on a regular basis, and there's a really nice audit template that sits on the RCR website. I've just popped the link in there. So if you're not already using that, that's a nice one to look at. And then if, having said all this, you're still receiving referrals from non-medical referrers or anybody which are consistently inappropriate, then measures such as considering a refresher education, communication, feedback on the referrals, all those kind of things, which I'm sure everybody does. But sometimes we get asked the question, how do you deal with persistent offenders? So people who are just not learning every time we send back referrals. Well, in extreme circumstances, if nothing else has worked, you might consider removal of entitlement. So, and this doesn't just apply to non-medical referrers, as I said, just removing that entitlement to be able to refer. Next slide, please. So when we talk to non-medical referrers and when we provide education or when we answer any inquiries, we're often asked, about the information that should go into a referral. And they basically fall under three categories, really. So there's the minimum legislative requirement, which falls under Regulation 10 of IRMA, and that says the referrer must supply the practitioner with sufficient medical data to enable the practitioner to decide whether there's sufficient net benefit as required by Regulation 11B. And Regulation 11B is the one that says that no one can undertake an exposure unless it's been justified by the practitioner as showing sufficient net benefit. So that's the minimum requirement. I'm always rather disappointed that IRMA didn't go further. and consider the person evaluating the images. So whilst the referral information may well be enough to secure that examination, if you like, what happens a little bit further down the patient pathway when the reporting radiologist or reporting radiographer is sitting assessing the images, and they're looking at maybe unusual or complex imaging appearances, and they have a tiny amount of information on the referral, so they have to start delving through the patient's medical history, through perhaps other diagnostic tests, certainly previous imaging, and they're trying to piece all those pieces together, only to find that 2 days later, perhaps they'll attend an MDT and they'll hear that golden nugget of information that would have absolutely made all of those imaging appearances make sense to them at the time. So we try and insist upon the right information in a referral, not just to satisfy the requirements of IRMA in terms of Regulation 10, but to assist the person undertaking the clinical evaluation to do that quickly and effectively and appropriately. And then the third point here, and I think this is not a lesser point in any way, is from the patient's perspective. So about 3 years ago, we undertook a big piece of work at the site in College of Radiographers called the Patient, Public and Practitioner Partnerships within Imaging and Radiotherapy. It's our guiding principles towards patient-centred care. And as part of this work, we ran a workshop where we had a lot of patients and lay people attend. And then we had some of those sit on a working party to write the guidance. And one of the comments that came out of that really struck me. And it's this one: if you don't have some information that you feel you should have, please take time to find it. Don't risk making a wrong decision about my care to save time. Please ask, and take time to use the information available on the patient information system and to update this with relevant information about me as a person. So if the referrer thinks about that when they're making the referral, and that saves the person trying to evaluate the images from spending all of that time delving through the patient record, you know, that's got to be better for the person who is at the centre of all of this. And patients actually believe that we have this information and we communicate. And sometimes, you know, they only realise we don't always have this when something goes wrong. So we always say to referrers, please tell us what you would need to know if you were evaluating the images yourself. And sometimes referrers do this, but obviously then they're, you know, they have all of the facts. But if they're not going to be evaluating the images themselves, please pass that information on to the person who is. Next slide, please. So having thought about all the requirements of training and our governance and making sure that our referrers understand what we need from them, what happens when we have to reject or when we have referrals that are unjustified? Well, Jeanette's just mentioned, I did catch that bit on the end of Jeanette's talk, Jeanette's just mentioned the quality standard for imaging, and that actually says that we need to have systems in place to think about these things, to manage the risks of medical exposures for our patients. And even if all the duty holders under IRMA in the referral pathway understand their roles and responsibilities and act appropriately, we need to think a little bit more widely than that in terms of the other staff involved in a patient pathway. So how do our administrative staff receive training to deal with referrals? Do they recognise easily when a referral is inappropriate? Do they know how to deal with that? So if, for instance, you specify 3 unique patient identifiers and they receive a referral that's only got 2, and they perhaps put a hospital number into the system and see, oh yes, that looks like the right person, do they then just fill in the missing bit, or do they think, actually, I need to double check this? So making sure that the administrative staff, who are such an important part in this process, know how to act appropriately to safeguard patients. Because we know from the annual IRMA, the CQC, the regulator reports, that we still X-ray the wrong person. And whilst those numbers are very small, the impact to people who are inadvertently exposed or receive a dose of contrast can be absolutely enormous. So when we're rejecting referrals, we should be able to support that with information to the referrer so that we're all learning. So is it just that there were inadequate patient identifiers and we didn't want to risk getting the wrong person? Is it that the request has been timed inappropriately? So perhaps the patient has already had this exposure or this procedure, or they've had perhaps an MRI that means they no longer need a CT. Or is it just that there's insufficient clinical information and as the practitioner, you just can't justify this exposure? You don't even know enough to be able to recommend an alternative. You need more information. And whatever the reason, please make sure that within your systems, the referrers understand why the referral is rejected or not justified. And then it just speeds everything up for the patient. Next slide, please. So just to sum this all up, really, a couple of years ago, we at the site in College of Radiographers, we designed a paused and checked poster for referrers. And you may have seen we have a whole series of these paused and checked posters, and they apply to each stage of the patient pathway and particularly to each duty holder in the patient pathway. And this one is a really nice one for referrers to look at. So it just sums up all the things I've spoken about into one nice place. And these can be freely downloaded from the site and College of Radiographers website. And they can be printed out and popped all around the hospital, perhaps not currently with infection control the way it is, but they can be shared. And one really nice use that we've seen of this is to use it as a hospital-wide screensaver. So just popping it on as a screensaver every so many months so that that goes out across the whole of the hospital. So that's really a whistle-stop through the guidance, and I think Wendy will join me again for us to take any questions if you have them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you so much, Linda. Absolutely brilliant. We've not had any questions through just yet, but I will just hold on for a couple more seconds. Just wanted to ask, is the presentation, are we able to share that post-conference and get all the links out as well? People to have a little look over, because as you mentioned there, Linda, it's a bit of a whistle stop. There's quite a lot of information to digest.
Yeah, I'm very happy. I presume you're happy as well, Linda?
Yeah, very happy. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, Wendy, Linda, I think we'll just call it there because obviously everyone's just going to get back on shift. It's been such a short notice event. I think everyone's just probably dipping in and out between shifts. So thank you both so much for joining us. As mentioned, we're going to get a nice comprehensive pack together for the delegates. And yeah, just cheers again for getting involved.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you both so much. Cheers. Right, everybody, before we end, just wanted to say a huge thank you to every single one of you that's joined today. I really do hope that the conference has offered some tangible, useful information that you can take back and use straight away. Without even going there, without saying anything more, a huge thank you to Axon Radiology for making it happen. They've underwritten all the complimentary passes for every NHS delegate on board today's conference. Adjacent to that, a huge shout out to Worldwide Radiology, who are working tirelessly to bring imaging resources to low resource areas around the world. To find out more about both Axon and Worldwide Radiology, you can contact Paul Cornell directly after this conference, and we will be sending out information on how to do that further as well. So yeah, before we leave, just wanted to say a huge thank you again to everybody for joining us. Please do stay safe. Take care, and we hope to see you at a conference again soon. Thank you.